Trial Lawyers University, where the Titans come to train. Produced and powered by LawPods.
All right. Well, we got Will Meekins and Ryan McCollum from, I don't know if it's a great state in North Carolina, but I've never been there yet, so I can't talk to how great it is. I heard it's beautiful there. I'm looking forward to coming. I've been to South Carolina, but Will and Ryan both came out, participated in the Joe Freed trucking boot camp. And so, Will, how is everything? How is everything out in North Carolina for you two gentlemen today?
North Carolina's great. Summer's over, so we got some cool weather coming in. It's
I really have to speak up a little bit or get closer to your microphone.
Yeah.
There you go.
North Carolina's great. It is a great state. You know, I think if you read anywhere, you'll see North Carolina's growing. People are moving to North Carolina. It's the state to be in right now, I think.
Damn, that's what I heard, but I'm kind of jealous I'm not there, but maybe one day. But anyways,
to you guys. One day, Dan.
One day. But other than coming to this boot camp, you guys both attended West Point at the same time, but didn't know each other. So that was
right. That's right. Yeah, I believe you were 2013, Will. I graduated in 2014. And we sort of had this moment a couple of years ago, right? We were at North Carolina's Plaintiffs Lawyers Convention and just kind of met each other. It's like, oh, you went to West Point? I went to West Point. When did you go? You know, we had that sort of aha moment. We did most of the same things in the Army after West Point, you know, infantry, branch, ranger school, all that fun stuff. Will is still in, served in the country. I am out. I did a clean break. So
you're serving the people now.
That's right.
What? Let me ask you, Ryan, what motivated you to go to West Point?
Yeah, it's something that I always wanted to do. So I had a lot of family members who were service members as enlisted folks. I got the opportunity to go, to the academy for college and go in as an officer, and that's something that I kind of always wanted to do. So it was a no-brainer for me.
How about you, Will?
Well, very similar. I have some family that were in the service at different times, and 9/11 was very real to me. I saw it happening in real time as a kid, and so I grew up kind of in that period where we were going to war, and so for me it just made sense.
All right, and so because people come to these boot camps, they have all different levels of experience in both trucking and both trials. So Will, give us a little background on your experience so far before attending the boot camp.
So I am a newer attorney. I've been a licensed attorney for about 2 years, but I'm in a small firm in Western North Carolina, and so was really lucky to kind of hit the ground running, to be able to handle cases on my own really early. Maybe I won't say too early. Now it's Western North Carolina. We've got conservative juries. You take some risk when you go to trial. I'm fighting to get into the courtroom. We've got some criminal defense attorneys, so I'll jump on some of their cases just to get that experience. But we've got some good ones lined up. So we're going to be in the courtroom all across Western North Carolina here over the next few years for sure. And
so give us, how many trials have you done, either criminal or civil? Give us some idea of the experience level.
Yeah, I've substantially participated in 4 jury trials, but they were all heavy felony cases. No civil trials yet.
There's a lot of commonalities, but there's a lot of differences too.
Right.
I can tell you, because I've done a lot of criminal trials myself, but not nearly as many civil. And a lot more. It seems like there's, maybe just because of the level of experience, it seems there's a lot more going on in civil, but maybe there's that much going on. Although the pressure, I think, feels higher in criminal cases, when somebody's looking at life in prison as opposed to getting some money, which is very important. Let's not undermine that. But, it's hard to compare that weight. So, anyways, that's why I was like, I don't know what I was thinking, being a criminal defense lawyer for 18 years, stressed the shit out of me.
Yeah.
And it doesn't pay very well either. So it stressed the shit out of me, and and I'm living just barely above the poverty line. So I don't know what I was thinking, but anyways. And how about you, Ryan? Tell us?
Sure. Yeah, similar experience level. I'm coming up on my 4th year of practice, also practicing in North Carolina. I'm in the eastern part of the state. So we're based out of Raleigh. I'm at Whitley Law Firm. It's one of the bigger regional law firms here in the eastern part of the state. I have done 3 civil trials, trying to build up, that experience level. I think I've got an average of 1 per year so far. So I'm trying to keep that going.
Or improve it a little.
Yeah, or improve,
improve it, or make it just maybe 2 a year. My goal is 3 a year. That'll be enough.
I think that's a good goal.
Yeah, we don't need to overdo this stuff. Like some of those people like Raleigh, you're trying 10 a year. That's just nuts. That's nuts. So you guys had both somehow made the decision to join the Joe Freed Bootcamp. So, Will, tell us about your process and why you came to the bootcamp and what you were expecting to get from it.
Yeah. So, our firm approach to all cases is to prepare them as if they are going to be tried. And so whether we think we're going to settle it early or before we even file a lawsuit, from the get-go, we treat it like it's going to be in front of a jury one day. And so I had a case that I think the defendants, and there are many defendants, are going to fight me on all the way. I think it very realistically could have a trial one day. And I met Joe at Academy of Truck Accident Attorney event. I got to know him a little bit, saw that you were putting this event and bringing him in to California. And I was thinking, what better way to get his take on my case, to be able to work with you and the other attorneys that were there on my case, because it's, as much as we like, our jobs and helping each other, sometimes it's hard to really pay attention or give the focus to somebody else's case, because they got their own stuff. And so this was an opportunity, that Joe was going to look at my case, and he was going to learn about it and ask me questions, and so that's what took me to California.
All right, and
for me, it was a couple things happening at the same time. Right, I had done a few jury trials, felt good about them, but I know I've got a lot of blind spots and I've got a lot to learn. So, being able to focus on the skills aspect of it was one motivator for me to come out to TLU in Huntington Beach for the trucking boot camp. Joe was another big part, right? I had just at that time, settled my second, sort of big trucking case, 7-figure case, and my firm started feeding me more of them. Like, all right, well, I have a few more in the chute right now. I'd love the opportunity to talk to someone like Joe at the outset and how I can frame this and how I should approach this to maximize the value for my clients.
That was kind of my intention in doing it. Is kind of like I can help people with their presentations and their performances, but obviously the strategy, the building of the case, the sequencing of evidence, the depositions of experts. Obviously, that's something that Joe's so far ahead of me and most everybody else on, that kind of put it together was given an opportunity for Joe Freed to kind of be like your co-counsel in the case, where he's going to give it his, give your case his attention, and also to create like kind of little mastermind groups within the program. So that's why, you two and, Daryl and Alejandro were together the whole time, so that we all knew each other's cases, got to know each other better, got to get a little more connected and comfortable with each other, because, it's, especially on the performance stuff, it's a little bit anxiety producing for most people, even doing it in front of other lawyers. I mean, so many people tell me, oh my God, this is more stressful than being in front of a jury. I'm like, yeah, I doubt it, but okay. You just don't remember, obviously because it's present right now. But when you got, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line, you're in the battle for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks with an adversary who's cheating and a judge who sometimes is putting their thumb on the scale to make your life more miserable. That seems a lot more stressful to me than, getting up and practicing of skills in front of your, friends. First you're, people that signed up, but I'm pretty sure that most of the people, become kind of friends in these programs. You spend 5 days and you're struggling together and you're watching each other get better, hopefully, and, seeing the growth in yourself and each other. I think that's it's a connector, right? Because it's not easy for anybody. And, nobody's born with these skills of performance, performing in front of a jury. Nobody's born with that. And there's really no true, the closest thing I can think of as that compares to it would be being a stand-up comedian, except you're just having fun out there. And the worst you can do is get booed, right? Still, it takes a lot of guts to get up there and get booed. Let's not make a mistake, and to try to be funny. But, I say the comparison because you have to know your materials. You have to connect with your audience, but you also have to adjust to your audience, and you have to riff off the audience somewhat, right? As a stand-up comedian. Well, you kind of have to do that as a trial lawyer too, especially in voir dire and, but throughout the trial. So that's the closest comparison I can think of to, but I think that both of you serving in the military is a big head start because A, you understand discipline of training. B, you understand pressure, right? The pressure of a courtroom cannot be, it's high pressure, but compared to people shooting bullets at you and, hearing bombs go off, to me, that seems jumping out of an airplane. That seems to be a bit higher level pressure, but different pressure. And eventually you get used to it and it becomes second nature. But because you did it every day for years, right? And you train with people who are doing similar things and with focus. Well, most people don't train their trial skills with any focus. They just get up to prepare all the strategy. They prepare all their, their crosses and everything, but they never put time into practicing them, right? They just say, I'm going to get up and do it. I'm going to be my authentic self. Well, generally that's not so great, right? Because your authentic self for most people is a nervous, shaky, stuttering, the mind gets slowing down on the processing. Without practice, without practice. And so that's what, my idea behind these boot camps is about, and really trying to figure out, what are the what are the things that people need to know? Because it used to be 3 days, then it went to 4 days, and now it's at 5 days, right? Because I'm like, because there's so much, obviously I need to do, I, as a person designing it, need to condense it as much as possible so that the people who are participating can get as much out of it in as little time as possible. Because I know time, is valuable. Time is money, and time is, I can't even imagine you guys with, how much stress times you have, right? Because you both work at law firms, so you got people that you're accountable to, but you also have families and children that you're accountable to, even more accountable to. They don't give up. They don't stop. You know what I mean? And so you really have to work, hard to be efficient with your learning so that you could be, higher with your production. Somebody tells me, oh man, I can't come to a boot camp. My wife just had a baby. I'm like, your wife had a baby? Like, you better get to boot camp. You got to pay for that. Like, this guy was at the last boot camp, Ray, nicest guy out of Florida, one of the nicest people I ever met. He's 37 years old. His wife's about to have their 8th kid. I'm like, 8th kid? I'm like, at 37? I'm just like, bro, I've got to help. We have got to work harder together because we have got to feed these children and put them through college. And don't show me pictures of them because then I might feel responsible for them too. Because I don't have any in my own. He's like, Dan, you can adopt. It's like my friend, I said to my friend Steve King, and he's like, because I don't have any kids. He goes, yeah, you do. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, mine. He's like, you're like the co-parent. What are you talking about, Dan? I'm like, okay, all right, that's pretty funny. But anyways, so that's kind of the idea, is to condense it to like and I think the areas that, we really focus on for the performance are, the cross-examination. Obviously, we have to, get them to concede our evidence. That's very powerful. But witness preparation, critical, right? We got to learn the story from the client and be able to internalize that story, feel that story, and then tell that story. But we can't tell the story we don't know. But then direct examination, because we don't get to tell the story the whole time. We get to tell the story in opening and closing as much as we want, and maybe on cross. But on direct, we got to throw up that question. So tell us about that, or what happens from there, and let and make sure that witness is properly prepared to, to tell the story of what happened to them, and hopefully the story that moves the jury to give the verdict that you think is just. And then, of course, there's obviously the opening statement and closing argument, which are kind of like monologues of performance skills. And then finally, what most people think is the most challenging part of trial, which is the, jury selection, the voir dire, which, most people have the hardest time, which I used to have the hardest time, getting up there and getting that connection going, right? Before they dig into the substance of the biases. First, getting that conversation flowing, getting people comfortable talking to you, getting people comfortable listening to you. That's, and so that's a lot to try to accomplish. And then, a quarter of the time you're working, every hour, every morning, hour afternoon, you're working with Joe. So I even have less time to, get all this done. So that's kind of like the whole idea behind these boot camps. And so December 15th through 22nd, we're going to Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. We'll be staying at the Pueblo Bonito Resort, Sunset Beach. We're going to be golfing, playing pickleball, and training about 6 hours a day, working on our cases. I am super stoked about this one. And so if you're interested in coming, you can be part of it all. We got about 21 people coming right now. It's probably going to be about around that size. So it's going to be an amazing way to spend the last quote unquote regular week before the holidays. So I want to just kind of talk about what you guys were expectations and kind of what you got out of each kind of chunk of it, let's say. All right. So let's first talk about, the performance skills, because that's really where it's, the performance skills, the opening statement, the closing argument. And so when it comes to performance skills, the things that I'm trying to give to you are understanding eye contact, right? I mean, because nobody even thinks about eye contact until they get up there, and then they're just, they look at somebody, they get nervous, they jerk around, and, all this stuff. So when it comes to, getting eye contact with those 12 or 14 or 8 people, whoever you have in the box, I think it's really important to be able to get up there and kind of be able to, what I consider to call it micro connecting. Look at each person in the eyes just for a moment to get people comfortable, looking back at us, and get comfortable looking into our eyes, even for a moment. So we come back there, the next time, they're like, oh, you're a familiar face in a way, right? Not like, you look at them, they look away. I mean, that's like, as a trial lawyer, you look at a jury, they look away. It could be a bit, let's call it disheartening, if that's the right word. So let me ask you, the micro connections, Will, how did you take to those? How did you, what was your take on that for the eye contact?
It's hard. It's not easy. And it's got to be deliberate and something you have to actually practice. I think, and Ryan and I were probably on the same boat with this, but, we've talked to soldiers and leaders and different people, maybe not giving speeches, but giving orders or, other, ways to communicate. And we've probably always been told, make good eye contact. You need to improve your eye contact. But I think we probably took for granted what that actually means. And it's not just now look towards the jury. It's taking it a step further and actually connecting, not just looking at them, right? And it's hard to describe until you've practiced it and realized how bad you are at it. But actually taking the time to look at somebody in their eyes in a way that actually builds connection, not just kind of glancing over them and not actually seeing them. I think so. It took a lot of practice. I don't know if I can say I'm good at it yet. I probably still need to practice it a lot more, but it doesn't come naturally to me.
Well, I would think I don't think there's anything natural about it, because it's intentional, right? And so like Dave Clark, who, we're doing this dark arts boot camp in January in Omaha. And that was, when I trained with him about 13 years ago. But actually, before I trained with him, when I first met him, we were talking we were at Jerry Spence's last trial out, and so I think it was out somewhere in Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa, and we were just sitting there chatting about Jerry's voir dire, and I said, "Hey, do you have any criminal voir dire?" And I'm like, "Yeah," and I showed him my criminal voir dire, and he goes, "That shit work for you?" I'm like, "Yeah, man, I've only lost like 2 trials out of the last 100." He's like, "Any idea why it works?" I'm like, "Nope." He's like, "When you can make the unconscious conscious, you're going to be fucking dangerous. In the civil world, we call that rich. And of course, me being the very, very lower middle class criminal defense lawyer, of course I want to, you see all your friends making money, you see all these people around you don't think are as good as a lawyer as you, making 5 or 10 times as much money as you. You're thinking, God dang, I gotta do something different, man. Because it's like great to help people, but you keep helping people all the time and don't make any money, it stops being as rewarding, because it's just the way it is. And anyways, it's about making the unconscious conscious is really what this is all about. Because unconsciously, we're all great storytellers. When it's our own story, when it's, the images in our mind, and, we're just telling the story, and we're not worried about being judged. But as soon as somebody puts a camera on us or puts us on a stand or says, tell us a story, we start thinking, and the conscious mind takes over. So that's really what, the ultimate goal is. How about you, Ryan? How about you in your new things you learned about eye contact and the micro?
Yeah, that's something that, I've always done is, right, when I'm talking to you, Dan, when I'm talking to you, Will, make eye contact, right? But how many times outside the context of a jury trial are you standing up and telling a story in front of 12 strangers? It's not natural, right? Yeah, it's a naturally sort of hostile, off-putting environment. And you're not thinking about, hey, I need to make an actual connection with these folks. So, training it, drilling it, and realizing, like Will, that it does not come natural to make eye contact in that context. It's something you need to approach with deliberation. And it's funny you said earlier the true natural self thing. I mean, count me in that camp, prior to coming out here. I'm just going to be my true authentic self. Nothing's more compelling as an advocate than to be yourself. And I still agree with those things, but you can still work these skills, polish these skills, and be your true authentic self. And that, I think, is the recipe for success, and something that, I've incorporated into my practice from this experience with you and your program, is that it's not one or the other. It's not mutually exclusive. Like, hey, I'm going to go up here and act in front of these people. It's, hey, I'm going to work on these skills that I'm going to then utilize, just like I would utilize, my skills and knowledge as a professional in framing and building the case and taking it to trial. I'm going to use these performance skills in telling this story, and it's going to make the case all that much more valuable.
Well, the key to all these skills and any skill is to, first of all, if you want to learn a skill, and this thing called a trial lawyer thing is a little more challenging to learn because there's no specific path. It's not like I can say, hey, Ryan, Will, follow these 10 steps and you will become a badass mofo, because it's not that simple, right? And if it was, we'd have a lot more great trial lawyers, and you wouldn't sit there and we all would have to go to all these conferences to try to figure it out endlessly, because the conferences are great. And I throw, obviously you guys haven't been to my Huntington Beach conference. You've been to my Huntington Beach conference hotel now, but I'm very proud of that conference, and a great deal of brilliant knowledge is shared, but it's just really, it's for the most part knowledge, except in the small workshops. Then we have some skill stuff going on because, there's 4 lecture tracks, which is more standard, but then there's 8 workshop tracks where it's small group training. Like Joe Freed taught a small kind of boot camp on trial for 12 people for 3 hours at TLU. Where it's kind of stuff we're doing here. And so it's that like specialized training that is very important for the strategy. But to develop a skill, first you have to identify the key components of that quote unquote higher skill you're learning. Like the higher skill we're trying to learn is the skill of connection, right? To be able to get up in front of strangers and in just a couple of moments, have that connection with them. But that skill is a combination of these smaller skills like eye contact, emotional state control, your hand and body movement, voice control, the pace of your voice, the sound of the volume of your voice, the inflection of your voice, glance control, getting the jury to look where you want them to look. And the ability to create space, the ability to imagine and create an illusion so the jury can see what you see, right? Because they can't see it unless you can see it first, right? If you can't imagine it, nobody else is going to see whatever. Nobody else can imagine shit. So, and then you have to identify, then isolate those skills, and then train them or practice them. But the challenge with these skills are there's no way to isolate them to the T, because you have to learn eye contact, like the microconnects, at the same time when you learn emotional state control, where your face is neutral and it slowly gets warm, and then voice control and the hand movements, and you say good morning everybody, and when you say the good, then your hands come up just slightly, and then you continue to look, micro-connect each person's eyes, even if you don't say the words to them. With your eyes you're saying it to them, and you're waiting, right? You're waiting for them to say it back to you before you say, before you move on. So a lot, the skill of listening, these are all things that really might come somewhat naturally until somebody puts a gun to your head called trial. And then, all you focus on is the gun. And, whereas that's why that's why we train these skills. That's why, the 6 weeks before we did the program, we had Zoom meetups where you met a little bit with Joe and talked about your cases and, his philosophy on this, but you met a lot with me and Giorgio. So let me ask you, Will, how do you think all those Zoom preps helped prepare you, or, maybe didn't, as much as you, like to have?
Yeah, I think, and we've talked about this too, Dan. I'm probably an example of someone who didn't probably take them as seriously as I needed to. I didn't take advantage of that time that we had with y'all ahead of time. I participated, but I probably should have put more into it, because there are so many skills that we learn and get to practice that, in those weeks ahead of the conference, I think in hindsight, I wish I had committed to knowing the script better and to really thinking about it and practicing it more. Because I think I did learn a lot over the experience, but I could have learned a lot more because the tools were there and the time was there. I probably got in my way a little bit, my own way. And that's part of it, is because I think through the process, I'm learning that I'm not as good at some of these things as I thought that I was. And so I had to actually kind of, watch a video of myself or get the critique a couple times from you or from Giorgio or someone else, and watching other people too. Like actually seeing somebody else do it and saying, why do I not sound like that or look like that? So it was a good experience. I don't know if I answered your question, but that was,
Yeah. It's like I'm trying my best to pound these things into people's heads gently, or insert it before they get here, right? Because the more they prep, the more they know even though I tell them this over and over, how many times did we tell? You know what I mean? Text you, hey, where's your videos? You come into class. Because people don't know what they don't know. And I know, right? I know, because I've done this so many times, what the different level of transformation and effect. My goal is to transform your life. That's my goal. And if you become a champion trial lawyer, you start winning cases a lot bigger than you used to, or winning cases you might have lost. Let me tell you, your life is much different. Okay. When you're a winner, when you make money and you walk in with confidence and you're a killer. I mean, life is different, right? Than, what it is when you don't know what really is going on and everything is new and it's all very stress inducing. I mean, it took me 6 months to stop stuttering when I started going to court. The pressure, it was overwhelming for me. And, the fear was overwhelming. And I think a lot of people face that and they just, try to pretend like they don't. And so they never deal with it. I think is a lot of what happens. I don't get nervous talking in front of people. Like, good for you. I don't believe you. In front of a jury, I don't believe you if you're not too experienced. But you know what? That's a good mindset to start with, right? The confidence. It's a good start. But let me see it. Let me see you perform, and I'll let you know. What, and you'll see it, right? Because with the videotaping, you see every performance, and it's not like the video lies. It's objective reality of where we're at this moment. And, when people have, struggle and they have struggle, to do even a rep of something, I'm just like, you know what? This is where you're at on your journey. This is a necessary step, whether it's you prepared enough or you didn't prepare enough, it was part of your journey, right? It's just, you learn from it. Okay. If I do this again, I'm the most prepared person there. I'm going to blow people away. Right. But how about you, Ryan? How did you find I know they're never fun and they're never convenient to be jumping on a Zoom for a couple hours a week.
No, they're not. But it's almost like listening to your own voicemail message, or reading your deposition transcript. Like, I ask that question, right? But I think there are two things about the video that I thought were really instrumental to the success of the program and what it meant to me. First of all, I've done mock trials or focus groups, things like that, but I've never sat down and said, all right, I'm going to record a 2-minute portion of my opening statement and, critique myself on it. That self-critique, being able to pick out the mistakes that I can see in my limited experience, like, hey, all right, I know I can fix that, right? So giving myself the opportunity to critique myself is something, first of all, I thought the videos were very, useful and necessary for. The second part is the practice of doing the prep videos themselves and being critiqued prior to showing up. That made the experience itself while we were out there all that much more valuable to me, because I felt like I wasn't starting at square one, right? I started maybe, I didn't prep perfectly, right? I missed a few here and there, but I felt like I started at a place perhaps ahead of some of the other folks there, and I was able to learn much quicker, pick up on things much more quickly than perhaps some of the other folks did. And I think I got a lot more out of the program because of it.
No, I think so too. And it's like, just people just because they've never had an experience like this, right? Because, when you do the prep and, like it's always different when it's real, when you're there compared to what you think it was going to be. So, but I obviously do my best to try to prep people, but I can only do what I can do. You know what I mean? Some people came to the program, they hadn't done one Zoom. I'm like, okay, well, you know what? That's going to affect what you pick up. And, sure enough, obviously it does. But, if they get a lot, they still get a lot from it. And then like, damn, I'm going to come back and I'm going to prepare. I'm like, yeah, because my goal is for you to go home and, be able to run a workshop for your coworkers, for your friends that want to be trial lawyers, that want to practice their stuff. Because, when is there a chance to practice your skills as a trial lawyer? Very rarely, right? But, when you go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll just say, to folks who may be, preparing to come out to a boot camp, haven't done one before, just trust the process. I mean, I'm going to be very honest with you. Through some of these, prep seminars, there are moments where I'm like, okay, does it make a difference if my hand is here or here? My inflection, my eyebrow should be like this instead of this. And you start questioning, like, okay, like, what is really the purpose of all this? But after, an hour or two at the program, it's like, oh, okay, I see now. It makes sense. There is a method to the madness. There is a rhyme to the reason. So just trust the process and, be a good, I mean, I was an athlete, growing up and through college. It's like, be coachable, right? We are signing up for this program to learn and to be taught. And we're trial lawyers. We have egos. We all think we're amazing and great. But be coachable through the process. Be willing to accept, hey, there's a lot I have to learn, whether you're like me, 4 years into this game, or you've got 30 years in the game. We all have something we can learn and improve on. And that's something that clicked for me not very long after being there.
Yeah, the coachability and the desire to learn is a big thing. So, a lot of times, and, it's like I know my audience, right? I know that they're busy. I know that they don't like to listen, right? I know that they think they're great and they already got everything figured out, because that's me, right? I mean, I am, that's me. I mean, throughout my life and many times. And, every time I get humbled, I open my eyes a little more and I'm like, got a lot to learn still. That's good. But like, especially like, sometimes there's a lot of resistance to learning and sometimes some hostility towards the process. And it's like, which I get it. I get it. People think they're great. And I hope people think they're great. That's great to have a great self-image. I tell people every day, you should look in that mirror and smile and say, man, you are the most beautiful human being God ever put on earth. And boy, you have a great personality. And boy, you have beautiful eyes and a great smile. How could anybody not love you and want to hear your voice? You got to, man. That's a lot better story than you suck, you're unattractive, you got bad smile, nobody likes you. I mean, they're both imaginary stories. Why not tell yourself one that gets you further along this thing called life where you want to go? So, because besides the micro connection, also the skill of, which is not easy, to make eye contact with somebody before you start talking. When you're done, pause for a moment, find that next person, preferably not the person right next to the person, but deliberately pick somebody else on your jury and connect with them before you start talking. I mean, it seems a very basic concept, right?
It does, but it's not. And well, I mean, what really made it quick for me, we're talking about stage left and stage right, and it's almost a big analogy to acting. And in terms of delivering lines, it's like, okay, well, who am I delivering this sentence to, right? And there are times in the past, and I mean, even now, yeah, I'm not perfect, but you're sort of talking to this amorphous space around people. It's like, who am I talking to right now? Right? I mean, make eye contact, say what you need to say, make eye contact with someone else, a sentence per juror, whatever the case may be. It forces you to be much more deliberate with your delivery. And that's something that, again, I think adds to being your true, authentic self. It's not an either or type of deal.
Yeah. And like this whole true, authentic self stuff, though, just to comment on that, it's like, nobody is their true authentic self when they are so nervous they're crapping their pants. Okay, nobody is there. You put a gun to somebody's head. Nobody's their true authentic self. But that's what trial is like. You can only become your true authentic self when you're calm, when you're relaxed, and you can be you. And if you look at the greatest trial lawyers out there, and you watch them in trial, they're so calm. The judge yells at them, like, "Sure, Your Honor, no problem, got it covered." Not. You know what I mean? They don't match the judge's negative energy. They're always about, calm thinking. How do I maneuver this? This guy's yelling at me. How am I going to get this guy who's got power crazy, wearing a bow tie so we know he's uptight, right? And how am I going to get him to not just like me, but allow me to try my case and stop interfering, right? Instead of, you can't battle these judges. So, but the whole thing is practice and confidence, and having superior knowledge, so preparation and winning. Those three things, that's what makes you calm. That allows you to be, quote unquote, your authentic self, right? But that trial world thing, man, it's it's always like, I kind of laugh at some of these trial consultants in a way that want to teach connection in front of a jury, but they've never stood up in front of a jury because they're not lawyers, right? So all they do is tell people what to do. And like lawyers are so desperate for help that these people that have never done something like this are going to be, their authority because they need some authority to follow. And it's better than following and not doing anything, but it's like, it takes a lot of experience up there to understand what's working, what's not, and how to continue to dial it in more. Right. But let me ask you, Mr. Will, this making eye contact before you start talking to people, we know how important it is, but this is something that we got to practice every day, and that's what I tell people when they come to the boot camp. Like, this is not, the last day. This ain't the end of this. This is the beginning. You finally have some knowledge. You finally have some understanding of what this quote unquote, very abstract, vague concept called connection is, that it's a skill. It's not something we're born with. It's not some kind of charisma that people have. It's a skill that can be that needs to be practiced every day. That can be practiced. The very aspects of it. The mindfulness of just. So, Will, have you continued to practice since you got home?
Yeah. And to be honest, I think we practice it almost every day.
We do practice every day. Because you have to practice. That's why I tell people as they leave, it's like, look, you got to practice every day. Every day, every person you talk to that works with you, your kids, your spouse, everybody, you have a chance to connect with them, right? And since we all want everybody in our lives to do what we tell them to do, when we tell them to do it and not ask questions, that's what we really want. Well, the chances of that go up astronomically if they feel connected with us, right? And so, we just got to practice every day, being mindful of the pace of our speech, our ability to articulate, what's on our face, because so many people are not just so oblivious to the look on their face, to what's going on with their face, right? And they walk around like a kind of a resting, grumpy face. And, whereas you can walk around with a slight smile on your face, a resting, warm face, and it takes just as much time, slightly more effort, but it's amazing the difference that people's response is to you when you take the time to, really activate their mirror neurons with a slight warm face instead of saying, when you say good morning. I mean, we say good morning to somebody, we have this slightly warm face, or, hey, welcome over, welcome to my house. But, when people get up front of the jury, like, good morning, everybody, welcome. And it's like, ooh, this is gonna be a bad day, because of nerves, right? And so, but, because the other, skill that we talked about and we work on is our emotional state control. So that our emotional state matches whatever that we're always intentional with us. So, that takes a lot of practice. Like when you say good morning, have a warm face, or, somebody talks about, we were talking about brutal honesty. I mean, most lawyers talk about some level of brutal honesty in their voir dires, right? I mean, credit to Nick Raleigh for kind of making it a concept. But, if you think about brutal honesty, who is brutally honest with us? Only people that care about us, right? Anybody, people like sometimes in the boot camp, like, oh, you're so harsh. You're so, you're so strict. I'm like, you came here for a reason, to get better, for me to try to focus on you and figure out what your weird idiosyncratic flaws are that are stopping you from connecting to others, help you see them, and give you some process to work on them so that you can eliminate them. And there'll be one less thing holding you back. I mean, that's my goal. But the people that are brutally honest with us are people who care about us. So when you talk about folks, let me ask you, Ryan, who's the most brutally honest person in your life? And I say it with a slightly warm face. My unconscious story to you is that somebody that cares about you, right? As opposed to who's the most brutally honest person you know? Somebody that's abusive, you know what I mean? Mean, right? That's what comes to mind because obviously brutal is a hard word. So, I mean, the way we ask the questions, and our emotional state, it all matters. And, Ryan, what did you kind of gather and learn from the practice of being intentional and controlling your emotional state for those 5 minutes?
That's one of the, I'd say, biggest things I got an awareness of participating in this program. You stand up in front of people and you're talking, everyone's going to have nerves to some degree, right? And in those situations, I default to, hey, all right, well, I'm not going to project fear. I'm not afraid to be up here. But hey, I'm running out the tunnel. I'm jumping out the door. I'm intense, right? And if you don't know me, I look like I'm upset. I look like I'm about to fight you. And really, I'm just really focused on what I'm doing. But having that awareness of how I look, watching myself on film and hearing all of your, loving comments throughout the process, it's like, Ryan, you need to chill out. Like, these people are your friends. Like, you're trying to get them on your side. You shouldn't look like you're about to, go fight someone right now.
Right. Especially with you, because you get like intense, your whole forehead.
Yeah.
You can't really
those
make my forehead
wrinkles
like
come
that
out
anymore because I had to get some Botox because these very deep lines in my forehead. This friend of mine, Elisa, she's like, Dan, those look like they hurt. They're so deep. You really have to do something. This is somewhat show business. I'm like, whatever. But then I was like, you know what? I'm going to take your advice. But anyways, it's a little better, but I still got some deep ass lines from all this frowning, I guess. But no, but it's important, right? I mean, because you're such a nice guy and you have but then when you get intense, I can't even make the forehead you make, but it's like, it's intense. It's like,
right. It's a naturally intense setting that we're in. I don't need to project intensity
right.
When I'm talking, when I'm telling my client's story, right? So being cognizant of how I present and then being deliberate with how I want to present in that moment is something that, not only, am I using now, I mean, I plan to use that forever, right? I mean, it's part of how you present.
Right. And it's state control is a critical thing of every aspect of trial, whether it's the opening statement, whether it's cross, we talk about that in a bit, the states of cross, because most people as soon as you say cross or they get angry. It's weird. It's like you see a shift in them. And these are people that haven't done, what I mean? It's like, it boggles my mind. Whereas like you see people who are really great at cross. And one of the things they're really great about is being kind and not raising their voice and not having this irritation in their voice and just being kind and just letting the facts and the words, and the, connection tell the story and, tell the story. It's like, and if it's designed right, delivered well and cross, they can't escape the truth, if we set it up right. But, and obviously voir dire, totally about, and direct examination, getting that connection with that client is no small, and that, the witness and the jury is no small task.
Well, and it goes back to it all tying in together, right? If you're not being deliberate with delivering, different lines to different folks, if you're not cognizant of your pacing, your breath, you're not going to have time to, regulate or transition your emotional state. I mean, before this program, it's like, hey, I have one emotional state. Like, I'm giving my opening. I'm focused. I am determined. I am intense. But, that's a part of the story is the emotional state of the storyteller. And it all just kind of ties together. You won't have time to be cognizant of that if you're rushing through your opening, if you're not making eye contact, if you're not thinking about your breathing. It all comes together.
Will, what did you take away from, the work on controlling your emotional state and the various aspects of trial?
Yeah, I think the direct feedback I would get, when I was talking to an adverse witness or the expert medical examiner, is that everything about my approach was that as an adversary. And so it probably would get in the way of me getting the responses I need from the doctor. It probably would throw off the jurors. They're looking and saying, well, why is Will so upset at this doctor? And the doctor sitting there, why is this guy so mad at me asking me these questions? We've just gotten started. And so I think, we're not trying to trick a witness into cooperating or, but we want them to come on the journey with us. We don't want them to have up walls and even on really basic questions fight us just because, like you said, we're looking at them or we're talking to them in a tone or, a way of speaking that just doesn't work. We want their help, even if they're not our witness. They might have some information and we need them to give it to us, not fight us over it.
Right. Especially when we're laying foundations and like the foundational information is, where it's like there should be no anger. It's like the basic rules of being an expert, like, being impartial, being objective, being complete. We expect that from any expert witness, or how are we supposed to, how's their testimony supposed to be relied upon? It's none of those things. So, it just takes a lot of mindfulness and intentionality to do all these things we're talking about.
Yeah, I think too, and Joe Free talked about it several times when we were working on these sorts of things about just being credible. And I think, if you're in there and you're laying foundation for something, or you're potentially impeaching a witness, but you're doing it in a way where your emotional state or the way you're asking the question doesn't align with what you want to do, right? So if I'm making a big deal about where a doctor went to school because I look angry about it, but that's not what I'm trying to do. I mean, there's nothing about where that doctor got their education that's an issue. Well, the jury, who's along for the ride, they're looking and they're saying, why does this guy care that this guy went to Duke? Does he hate Duke? And I do not care for Duke, but go Heels. But that might not be what I want them to take away from it. There are things I have to do procedurally, right? I've got to talk about certain things because I've got to check some boxes. But if I make a big to-do about something that's not important because I'm not controlling my emotional state, or if the doctor or whoever the witness, if they make a non-issue an issue because they're fighting or being combative, I don't want to be the person. Like, I want to be the most credible person in the room. I want the jury to see this witness. Well, why is this witness being so combative about where he sleeps at night or how many hours he works during the week? Like, why does that make him so angry? Like, I don't want, I want the jury to make that their own kind of connection with that witness and maybe not find them credible because they're being overly combative. So,
Eric Oliver is coming to Las Vegas October 28th through November 1st. For a 5-day case story bootcamp. So Eric will be working with you on developing your case as a story. Basically, he will be your trial consultant on your case. And then myself and my team will be working with you on your presentation skills, your voir dire, your witness preparation and direct examination, and your cross-examination skills. So at the end of the program, you'll both be a much better storyteller and, just as importantly, maybe more importantly, telling the right story. So join us in Vegas. All right, so let's talk about hand movement, because that's such a big challenge for so many people. And the thing that I've observed over time with so many people is that their hands are where all the tension from their body seems to run to. Either they make constant fists or their hands are stiff as a board. But it takes practice to relax, right? And that's just part of it, right? Then getting your hands to actually be enhancers and facilitators and of your ability to connect with people, instead of these weird things that are connected to your body that you're not sure what to do with them. And so you're going to ignore them, and they just kind of either dangle by your side or hold onto a podium, while you talk, right? I mean, that's such a default for so many people. Or, one lawyer told people, "Oh, do this with your hands. Just hold your two fingers together by your sides so they don't do weird stuff." And I'm just like, that's the dumbest advice I've ever heard, because then you're standing there in front of your jury with your little fingers pinched together, which is so unusual and odd looking. They're like, what is going on with that guy's hands? I mean, because it's a noticeable thing, whereas it's like training to relax, right? But, when you train so that's just part of it. But because I think it's very important that, we can only talk to one person. We only connect with one person at a time. And so if we, are intentional about that, and we make, eye contact with the person before we start talking to them, but also, utilize the use of one hand between that person and ourselves. And, so it acts as like a connector between the two, right? Because it's a visual, it's not just words and the connection of the emotion, but now it's like this physical thing that's moving between yourself and your juror, yourself and your witness, and the training of it. Then I don't know if you guys found this since you've been home or stuff, and you start, intentionally using your hand when you're talking to somebody, and you see that I've experienced myself. It really improves my connection with that person, although they have no idea why, right? Because my movement of my hand is in their lower peripherals. They don't know I'm doing it unless I point it out to them. But this way we can always be practicing every day to get better at these skills, so that they get deeper into our unconscious. And, whenever we need them, they're there. It's not like I have to think what to do with my hands, because that's what we do in training. We have to think about everything. And so, Will, what was your takeaways, insights? And it's not just the thing with that, but also obviously the good morning, everybody, and having, what I call Jesus hands, or now we need to ask you all some questions, right? Some, what I call the blooming flower, and things like that. So, what were your takeaways with, I guess, body hand movement, Will?
I think it creates, we used our hand movements to almost create an expectation in the listener, right? So we're passing off an idea to another person, or we're physically moving the witness or the juror in their mind from one part of the scene or the accident scene to another, right? So we're forcing them to use their imagination, and we're doing that through micro connections. So we're pulling them, making eye contact as we're moving, but we're actually using the well of the courtroom, or wherever we are, the boardroom or the mediation room. And it's not just, we're just talking about some obscure event. We're literally there, and we're pointing to it. And it forces that witness or the listener to look where you're pointing and to see it. Oh, so it's over there. And now let me imagine it. So it, even if they don't want to go there, they don't want to imagine it, the horrors or the bad thing that happened, they don't want to see themselves doing it. But you don't really give them a chance. You take their eyes and you move it to the body or to the bad thing that happened. So that was this, part of my takeaway, and I do use it, and I use it when I coach my kids' soccer practice, or if I'm doing I'm on some boards, and so when I'm talking to other board members in a meeting, I even find myself falling back on doing it now. So it's working.
Well, hopefully it's not falling back. It just happens to be it just starts happening without thinking about it.
Yeah.
As soon as you become aware of it and think, it like messes things up for a moment.
Yeah.
Whereas you're like, okay, I've gotten to the point where thinking about it, it's like thinking about walking, right? If we think about each step and stepping down and pushing off, we'll fall because, we'll walk very awkwardly. We may fall because walking is something that we've done so much that we can do it without thinking about it. Thank God. And, my goal is that these performance skills that we're learning, that people practice them to such an extent that they all become part of them, like walking, right? And they're just like connection machines. I mean, and practicing that connection, like I get to go to a lot of conferences. I go to a lot of conferences. Like I'm going to ATAA, in a couple of weeks. By the time this podcast comes out, I'll already be home and back doing whatever I'm doing, or teaching another boot camp next week, actually. So when this comes out, I'm kind of psyched about that. We just had one last week, and we're having one next week right here in like my Vegas dojo. And so, when I go to all these conferences, I meet so many new people, right? And, sometimes it's easier because some people I haven't met before know me in some way, shape, or form from these podcasts or from webinars or from conferences. But still, I get this chance to meet so many new people and connect with them and listen to them and talk to them and hear about whatever they're working on. And it's, and I just bring it up because like talking to strangers is a skill, an important one, and practicing it, right? And get that connection going with every single person, because the great trial lawyers, most of them are the same person outside the courtroom as they are inside the courtroom. Now, some of them have a total different personas. Like, they're antisocial. They don't want to hang out with anybody. They don't like being around people. But they're still great trial lawyers, right? Because they could just switch. But most of them aren't like that. Most of them are, kind of similar to what they are in the court, very similar to the courtroom. And so the connection is the key part. How about you, Ryan? Talking about the body and the hand movements, things that people might not have thought much about or recognize much about it until they see themselves on video, with their hips moving around and their hands, all this weird shit that not everybody, but I'm saying everybody I've actually come in contact with does when they get up there and perform, right? So you just turn the camera on, put it in front of a group and like perform. You're like,
Yeah, there's a couple things, I had to break, right? I would bob my head or move my head around for some reason. You see it on camera, you're like, why the hell am I doing that? And it doesn't really play to anyone. But in terms of what we learned, there are two categories, I would say. There's the connection hand movement, the conversational hand movement, and then the illustration hand movement. And I think in terms of the former, it's just another way to build a connection between you and whoever you're talking to, right? The hand movement builds expectations, and you touched on this, Will. It's like, okay, when I'm done moving my hand, sort of lob the question to you physically. There's no question that it's your turn to answer. And that way, it's an additional reinforcement mechanism to the witness, or really wherever you're using that. Now, in terms of the performance or the presentation hand movement, I think of it as an additional medium, right? We can have visuals up on a board. We, of course, have our voice that we present with, but by using our hands in a deliberate way, it's another tool to bring those jurors into that moment, whatever story we're telling, we bring them there with us through the hand movement. Like when I move my hand, it's natural human reaction. You're going to follow it. You're going to go there with me. And that's something that needs deliberation, because I've always talked with my hands. I'm doing it now. But using it deliberately to not just facilitate, but augment the story I'm telling, it's just another tool to put in your kit bag and use to bring those folks on that journey with you. Because that's what we're trying to do, is trying to bring them into that moment.
So I'm going to give you a little demo here. Let's see if this works. Just so people understand what we mean about glance control and hand movement. So probably can't even really see this, but hold on a sec. just for fun. All right. So the idea of glance control is like, so the subject of the jury, Trucker Tom, is driving south. So the hand comes up. How about now? It's kind of hard. Okay, so we talk about creating space and glance control. So it's hard to kind of imagine, but if you deliver the subject to the jury like Trucker Tom, and then start, use your hand to simulate to be the truck, the semi, right? And people are like, why is this little C shape of your hand? Why is that a semi truck? I'm like, because if you close your eyes, you can picture a semi going down the road, and open your eyes and look at your hand. I'm pretty sure that's what it'll look like. So I kind of like, it's like sign language for the unconscious mind. So, but if you give the subject to the jury and then it's driving south, and you kind of move with your eyes and your hand at the same time and then pause after the verb, well, that's what we call creating space, or, creating, and we all create space with every story we tell to every person we tell, because our unconscious minds does it. But when it's not our own story, or it's our own story and we're under pressure, we generally fall into just words and nothing, no movements. And it's like, and it all feels so weird and so different. So those are just, it just takes practice, the eye and coordinating them all, right? It's not like you got to work on one skill at once. You got to coordinate all those skills, simultaneously to make it, to make it all come to life. That's why people are like, oh my God, this is so overwhelming. I got to think about my eyes, my voice, my face, my hands, and remember what I want to say. I'm like, I know. It's going to take some practice. I'm sorry. They're like, this feels so unnatural. I'm like, of course it feels unnatural. What feels natural the first time you do it? I mean, I'm trying to learn to play pickleball. Very unnatural movements and hard to do, but you know what? I want to get good at it. Because, even though you guys were invited, you're not coming to Cabo December 15th through 22nd for the first TLU Cabo golf training pickleball outing. But I understand it's before the holidays, but I'm going to plan it ahead for next year. It won't be during the holidays. And then maybe you guys will want to come, because it's not that fun, being in Cabo, being at a resort, golfing on a world-class course on a daily basis, training with a bunch of people that you kind of, have already, who are really practicing, working on their craft, and then, playing pickleball, going out to, it's not that great. Perfect weather. You can see the whales off the, on the ocean front. Forget about it. You guys wouldn't like it. You should stay in North Carolina. You got the ocean up there.
It sounds great, Dan. Come on. We want to.
Well, you know what? This is going to be the beta testing, the dry run. I'm going to go work out all the kinks this time. So that way, when I do it next year and invite you guys, you'll be like, let me talk to people at the program, make sure it's up to my standards. It's up to snuff. Depositions Are Trial with Satch Oliver in Rogers, Arkansas, March 3rd through 7th, 2026. You'll be working in depth with Satch and his team on your deposition skills, and they'll be working with myself and my coaches on your trial performance skills. That means witness prep and direct, cross-examination, voir dire, and performance skills. It's going to be a great group. It's going to be small. It's limited to 15 participants. Hope you can make it to Rogers, Arkansas. Oh, but let me ask you both, because you spent a lot of time with Joe Freed, and Joe worked his ass off at this program, which is, like he worked hard to help all you folks with your cases. And so, Will, let me ask you, what were your like takeaways from your time with Joe and, your insights, not just on your case, but I assume you got some insights on a lot of other cases, because you had Ryan, Daryl, and Alejandro in your group. You were all working your own cases.
And I took this away probably from listening to him speak with the other guys in the group. And it's not, I don't think there's anything groundbreaking about it. It's pretty common sense, but it doesn't seem to be what we do. But it's the idea of when you've got a case, you got to understand why it's important to you as the attorney. And I think, if it's a case with terrible damages or a loss of life or loss of a limb or the ability to do something, I think that's a good place to start with a case, because that's where from that, you're going to build out everything else. That's you know why it's important to you and why it impacts you in a certain way. So you know what emotional state it puts you in, so you can control it and be deliberate about it. And if it matters to you, you got to be able to define it and describe it, so you can pick the words that you use, or the images, or the way you use your hands at certain times, to get the jury to feel that too. But that was probably my biggest takeaway. Again, not specific to trucking litigation, but I guess probably to just storytelling in general. Know why the story is important to you before you try to convince somebody else that they should think it's important, which I thought was kind of neat.
Yeah, because he even asked me a question about my my jail abuse case. He said, Dan, why should the jury care? And it's such a simple question, seems so obvious, but how many lawyers sit there and really ponder that question? Why does this matter to them? I know why it matters to me. I know why it matters to my client, but why should it matter to them? And the closer, the more you can put your finger on that, communicate that point, that principle, that concept, I think they definitely, ups the likelihood of success.
And I use it too. I mean, it comes into play. That advice kind of comes into play in the different performance skills that you taught us as well. So, I mean, I've asked since the conference, I've asked my own clients, when we don't have the best offer, they're not happy with the offer from the insurance carrier or the defendant, and we're deciding, are we going to spend a lot of money and go fight over this in court? And I think sometimes I'll ask them, well, why is it so important to them? And I think sometimes they have a weird reaction to it, because they're like, you're my lawyer, why are you asking me why this is important? Because it can't all just be about money. Because if it's all about money, sometimes you might get lucky, but it's got to be about more than that. It's got to be, I was wronged, right? This was unfair. And why was it unfair? Like, why, it was an accident. What's unfair about it? And that helps you draw out maybe different themes or arguments you want to make. It's unfair because this is a big company and they've not accepted responsibility for the last year. And now they're coming to you here on the first day of trial, and it's for the first time we are now hearing that they are taking responsibility. And now they want to make it about my client being unfair. And all she wanted was a fair offer from the beginning. We didn't want to be here. But anyways, that's kind of what I took away from Joe.
Right. And if it's obviously just about money, well, the jury's not getting any of that money. So not too many people care about, it's like this friend of mine, a guy I used to be friends with, like 10 years ago, sends me a copy of a check for like $2 million with his name on it. And I'm like, bro, where are you taking me on vacation? Or what are you buying me? Because if you're not taking me on vacation and you ain't get me nothing, well, why would I care that you just got $2 million? I mean, except to tell me that, to brag that you have money and I don't, other than that, what's the point of it, right? And so, when it just comes down to money, I think it kind of loses a lot. I mean, obviously, and money is, let us never undervalue the value of the money, but the money is really a measurement of what was taken, right? Just like in business, money is a measurement of what we're contributing to our society. Because, it's like, if you want to make more money, figure out how to serve more people, right? Or serve less people, but serve them more, serve them bigger, provide more value in their lives. And it'll be amazing the fact that they will give you money, because money is just an illusion of value, right? Of a chunk of value, $1 or $1 million. It's just and so, obviously it's not something real tangible until it is, right? Until we don't have it. But it's an illusion of value. So we have to understand that when we're talking, and measurement of value too. How about you, Ryan? What'd you get from the Joe Freed? Your 10 hours of, small group and whatever time he spent, because he was at, breakfast, lunch, and dinner with us too.
Got a lot from Joe, right? And it's sort of a, disclaimer, caveat, however you want to put it. All the technical stuff, right? Amazing, right? He has an unparalleled amount of expertise in the realm of trucking law. We learned a lot of that, in the lead up sessions, the prep sessions. And that's all amazing stuff that I'm going to use in my practice for years to come. But like what I learned from Joe, the person, being there with him, just his mindset and how he approaches a case, whether it's, damages or liability. On the liability side, one of my favorite things he said was, we're plaintiffs' lawyers. As plaintiffs' lawyers, the case is about whatever we say it's about, right? So if I get a case and I say, hey, this is a left turn case, that's all it's going to be. All right, this is a broken leg case. All right, well, if you treat it like that and work it up like that, that's all it's ever going to be. So, go deeper and make it about something more than just what's on the accident report, than what you see at face value, because there is something more there. And that applies to both liability and damages, right? There's a human element that Joe talks about a lot, teaches a lot about, that you need to boil the case down to something that 12 strangers are all going to understand and agree on. All right. Maybe, probably a lot of folks on that jury haven't broken their leg before, right? Maybe a couple did. Maybe they broke another bone. Who knows? Who cares? But everybody on that jury can understand the feeling associated with being unable to run with your daughter anymore, being unable to pick your kids up, being unable to play pickleball like you used to, not being able to enjoy something you used to enjoy doing, having that taken away from you. Everybody can empathize with that. So finding what that is and making the case about that, that's what's going to drive value. And that's probably one of the biggest things I learned from Joe.
I was really, because Joe, was obviously, not obviously, but Joe is very instrumental in my life. I mean, he's the one that he's like, blame me, because like about 13 years ago, him and I were having a bite to eat in Vegas, and I was talking to him about how I really want to become a plaintiff's lawyer, because I just went to my first plaintiff's lawyers convention. I was like, these people are rich, and they look like they're having fun too, and they don't look as stressed out as I am. So, and I think I'd like all these things. And so he gave me, advice on how to do it. And, he's like, well, what do you know that they don't know? And I'm like, well, I've always been really good at prepping my plaintiff, my criminal defendant. And everybody says, oh, no, you can't put your criminal defendant on the stand. I'm like, I put him on the stand almost every time, because if the jury likes him and they trust him, they sure the hell ain't going to convict him, right? But if he's just somebody they don't know and they have no connection with, well, it's a lot easier to convict, right? And and Joe, I know him from like the Trial Lawyers College. He was my instructor back in 2003 when I went there, and kind of became friends with him and saw him every year for many years, until, of course, I had my little falling out with the old Trial Lawyers College, where they decided to sue me during the pandemic. But that's okay, because you know what? It all shook out in the end, right? And it's like, they got their philosophy, which I strongly disagree with, of psychodrama, endless reenactments, endless discovering the story. And my friend Clark, he's like, discover the story. He's like, when will they ever get it? There's only one story in trial, and that's the betrayal story. That's it. Find the betrayal story. That's where you find the friction. That's where the money is at. When it's about the defendant and what they did to hurt your client and to hurt us all, as opposed to about your plaintiff. He calls, when people just talk about their plaintiff, he says, tell me about your case. They start with the plaintiff. He calls that the mommy story. I'm such a victim. It's so unfair. He's like, that might get you a little bit of money, but that's not going to get you, the nuclear verdicts. It's just not, right? You got to get the jury motivated. Cross-examination. We spent a lot of time on cross, and you'll be happy to know that we have evolved our cross training since you were there. Cross training, because we started off with that's where we started the video practices too, right? With the cross-examination of the defense medical expert, training the skills of, leading questions only. Doctor, you're a board certified medical expert. One new fact per question. To become board certified, this requires advanced education. Looping, which means to establish a fact and repeat that fact in the next statement. This education, it takes place both during medical school and after you get out. Using the present tense. Not it took place, but it takes place both during medical school and after you get out. But while you are in medical school, you do take classes, right? Being intentional with your pacing, with your breathing, dropping the taglines like right, correct, isn't it true? Or if the statement's necessary, if it's necessary, and you're making statements like this that maybe are not your quote unquote normal questions because it's more of a statement, then you just little pause goes by for a couple beats, a couple seconds, then say true. And then that space between your statement and the true gives the mind of the audience time to process and understand the information. It actually sinks in more than people that, and training ourselves to slow down. You watch cross-examination on CVN compared to somebody's direct, it's so much faster. And they're like, you spilled the coffee, true? Right? And it's like, the person's like, yes. I'm like, okay, well, maybe 70% of the jury caught that point, but the 30% that can't, and us as lawyers, we're used to talking fast, right? Because everybody around us speaks our same language. Our minds are smarter than, 99% of the people because we're lawyers. We went to graduate school, we study, we train. And so we process faster. But if we speak at the same rate that we're processing for people who don't process as fast as we are, who may not be as educated as we are, who are not speaking this legal language that we are, you're going to lose a lot with those people because they're going to overweigh their mind, and they're going to eventually start tuning out if they can't keep up. And then if you go too fast, as soon as they lose the thread, well, it's really hard for them to catch back up, right? To get the concept. It's like somebody's talking to you, you get distracted for a moment, and you start listening again. You're like, what the fuck are you talking about? And so, but also obviously using, not obviously, but using a flip chart and training ourselves to be confident and effective with that flip chart. Because once you understand how to use a flip chart and how to teach the jury with the flip chart by, writing legibly, by putting, just one topic per page, by spacing it out, and by, when you look at it, controlling where they look, it becomes one of the most effective teaching tools and most powerful teaching tools in the trial, because you are el profesor when you're up there writing on that board. And every time you write on that board, it creates what's called an anticipation trance with the jury. They sit and they stare at that 30 seconds it takes to write impartial, and you step away from it and they're like impartial, and it sticks in their mind, right? And so, because you're teaching them with your words, with the writing, the more aspects of communication we can hack with them, the more likely they are to remember the information we're trying to, communicate to them. Occasionally bringing the jury in. You see some lawyers are really good about looking over at the jury and answer questions, and it feels natural. And you see some, and it just feels awkward. It doesn't work. But like finding that comfort level of space, like I'm personally one that like looks at them not that much, but when I got something I want them to remember, then I'll look at them and be like, folks, remember this. And so, but those are really, I think, the core skills that I want people to get from cross-examination, right? And so that when they practice it, and they practice the hand movement, the hand comes up on the first word and extends out while you're talking. Doctor, you're a board certified medical expert. And then at the end, when you ask the question, your eyebrows raise and your fingertips kind of extend a little bit, kind of like flipping the question off or over to the witness, right? And now they know that it's a question, and also kind of getting them, and making eye contact with the witness. So it's almost like you're trying, trying to put them almost in like this trance where it's just you and them, and you got total control over them, right? I mean, that's what every lawyer wants, isn't it? Total control over your adverse witnesses. When you tell them, you look at me, move your hand, like they jump, right? That's when you got it in their head, right? They're like, because really the thing they don't want to do is be embarrassed, right? I mean, most people, they got pride. And like this cross-examination of the defense medical expert that, anybody's listening to this podcast has heard it many times, right? Because I used to do it every podcast. But what it really does is draws a line in the sand where you're calling their defense expert a dishonest, lying whore, basically, without saying it. And so, but by, laying out the questions of the proper way to do a medical evaluation, one that's impartial, objective, and complete, versus doing a biased one, and the risk associated with it of, misleading the jury about the patient's condition, or misinforming them about their injuries, or deceiving them as to the extent of the human harms and suffering that were caused. Well, I personally think it's, one of my better pieces of work. But what was your guys' takeaways from, the cross training that we did? So, Ryan, we'll let you field this one first, buddy. We're not used to having a panel here. I'm not used to being a moderator because I abhor panels. Every time I go to a conference, I see 5 people sitting on their asses on big ass couches and cushions up there on a stage. And I'm like, wow, can anybody get more low energy than this? Can anybody take less responsibility for this hour than distributing it amongst 5 people to, spit out a few ideas for 10 minutes? So, but I digress. Cross-examination. What are your thoughts? What is your takeaways, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest takeaway was that you don't need to be the bully, right? Have a plan and just ask the doctor, ask whoever your adverse witness is these questions. Not in a nonchalant way, but not in a friendly way, but finding that balance. You're not trying to be the bully. I very much came off like that in the past, whether it's in deposition or in trial. Everybody wants that Perry Mason moment. It's like, you were there, true? Let the witness. Yeah, I know everybody says, cross-examination, that's your testimony, right? You're leading the witness. All those foundational things ring true. That doesn't mean you need to be a bully, a jerk. You can lead them where they need to go, or rather where you need them to go, without taking that attitude. And that's probably one of the biggest things I learned from sort of studying, training, drilling, your cross-examination methods. The other part, you already hit on it, was the utilization of the flip chart, right? You put on your teacher hat. I never was a teacher before, but I know that some people are visual. Some people are, that we learn in different ways. Some people are hands-on. Some people are, auditory. Having a different medium, right? Having something that can cater to each of those different needs, that'll get you some points. And it'll force you to be more deliberate with your questioning too. And it'll force you to take those pauses, which are all important in building that anticipation, because it's easy to drone on. And after 5 minutes, juror number 6 is checked out thinking about what they're having for dinner later. I mean, it's a part of the game. With something like that, you can hold their attention for longer. That's what I took.
All right. Will, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I think
Ryan
there's just a lot. There's a lot that you can improve on. You're taught in law school or through movies or TV that cross is, asking the leading question, but it's a lot more than that. And you can, and everybody's in a different spot, but whether it's the pacing, the rhythm, the way you make eye contact, your use of your hand and arm signals, it's managing the facts, establishing or confirming an established fact and then introducing only one new fact per question through looping, which you taught me. It's just, you could kind of, I guess you could rest on your laurels and go with what you've got so far and ask leading questions, or you can really study it and practice it and work on your breathing and pace. You said something the other day I thought was kind of neat about how to, if you want your jury to really, or whoever your listener is, to really focus or really to stick out to them that there was a long, like something took a while, or there was like time is an issue or something you want to relay. Well, take time in your question. Allow an awkward pause. And maybe that's to show an actual delay in time, or maybe that's to draw attention to your next question or the last thing that you just said. But to use that space, that's my biggest takeaway. It's just you gave us a lot of skills and techniques that we can work on, or not. Some of them we will use and some of them we won't. But you've given us like some tools in our toolkit. So when we come across a specific situation, our default now is to go to one of those tools, not just badger the witness or, force them to answer the way, because we have no other tools available to us.
Well, right. You can't use a tool if you don't own it, you don't possess it, right? It's like if you don't have a hammer, who cares how many nails there are? You got nothing to hit it with, right? You hit it with your hand, it's going to hurt real bad. And so we did learn. I think the part that we added to this program that we haven't really done before was, doing the cross-examination of the defendant truck driver, right? I mean, we learned the cross-examination skills, and then the obviously the opening statement is the story of the case, about a 3.5 minute story of a truck driver who, pulls off the highway, and there's cars coming. He waits, wait for the cars, and he waits for two of the cars that get off the freeway onto the exit ramp, but there's a motorcycle that we can see the headlight for, but whatever reason, he doesn't see it or doesn't gather that it's coming straight at him, and steps on the gas, goes across the highway, and the motorcycle obviously doesn't see him and slams into it, and the guy dies, right? And then, obviously the guy gets out, takes a look at it, calls the risk manager, and explains, tells him what happened. The risk manager tells him, call the police. The police come and do a little investigation, recognize the guy's dead, but then we could, learn to tell that same story. And it's helpful here because this story has a dash cam video from the truck, right? And photos from the scene. So it's real easy to imagine the story. I mean, this is really great evidence to tell what happened. And then, we also really, I think really go a long way to getting, best practices for the use of a Google map, like the one I have behind me, right? It's a Google map that we use for this program, which is, overview of the highway and the exit ramps, and, to show the jury how this all happened. And, the most common visual that I've seen in the majority of cases people work on, which are auto, trucking, or motorcycle, is this Google map, some form of a Google map. And, people that, like, you can see this, like the main roads go horizontally, east-west, but the story of this case, the trucker was going north on US 411, but I'm not going to put the visual straight up and down vertically, because that's like he's a rocket taking off. And whether you're going north or south, you're still traveling horizontally along the earth. I mean, you're still, and so, taking that into account and adjusting your Google map, and, learning how to, when you look at the map, the jury looks at the map, right? Or the witness does. And it's just controlling all that stuff and practicing telling the story of, one new fact at a time with looping. Like, trucker Will, now I want to talk to you about the day when you're driving south on US 411. Okay? You say yes, Will?
Yes.
Yes. And so when you're driving south, you pull off the freeway and you come to a stop. It's hard for people to see, but and when you come to a stop, you wait, and you see a set of headlights coming at you. And so when you see the set of headlights, you wait for them to pass and get off onto the off-ramp to I-75. Then you take your foot off the brake and you step on the gas. You pull your truck just a couple feet forward. Then you see another set of headlights coming. But anyways, and so it's a matter of telling it one fact at a time and looping, and training ourselves to wait for the witness to answer. If they don't, they say, true? You know what I mean? And so you have to listen. That's why I tell people, when you practice your cross, practice with a human being, even if it's your 6-year-old daughter, and tell her, don't answer daddy every time, and say yes. Sometimes she'll stare at me like I'm, on drugs or something. And it's like, okay. Then you have to say, true, right? And so practicing. And then the last program we did last week, we even practice, because everybody works on their cases here, and they tell the story of their case, and, and work on taking their boring ass narratives that everybody comes here with, and making a 3-dimensional, hologram, right? A 3-dimensional story that you use stage left, you use stage right, you use stage center. You understand these concepts of movement and space and people walking and sitting and all this stuff you have to do. But to be able to do all that, and then tell use that skill then after you work on your opening to tell the story of the defendant, right? Of your case. So now you're applying these new skills to a different fact pattern, but a fact pattern you already know. So therefore, it's a chance to actually apply the skills that you've been working on in a more quote realistic setting, which is your case. And so that was a big, that was another step forward. Oh, let me ask you, as far as like, telling the story and presenting, you both spent some time working with us on your own cases, right? I mean, on the I think you guys were in my group on that morning when we worked on the performance and presentation of the case. So I know, remember, Will, your case was a guy who lost a couple legs. I mean, Ryan, your case, a couple guys got legs. Will, your case was, remind me what your case was.
Yeah, I've got it's a truck pulling a trailer, and you got this really catastrophic accident where the vehicle flies through the air and it's smashed, and he's trapped inside for about an hour because they can't get him out.
Right. And so in working with your case, Will, how did applying these new skills that you've been learning to your case, to telling the story of your case so that the jury gets it, what were your takeaways from that?
Yeah, I think, well, one, and because we worked on that part of it, Dan, and then we worked with it on Joe, kind of the same idea. And for my case, the scene that we might set, the accident scene obviously is important because it's an accident case, but the scene that we're probably going to set is in the boardroom years before the accident, because that's where in my case, the bad conduct really took place. That's where the betrayal took place. So it's going to be about setting a table, right? Setting who's at the head of the table and who's off to the right, and what are they talking about, and what story are they, what's their story, right? Who are they, and how are they involved in this accident? So, and that might mean creating a literal, in the space in the courtroom, literally creating a boardroom, right? So, and having the jury, using it, like having the jury see who's sitting at the head of the table. Maybe the witness I'm talking to at that time, they're sitting there at the table. Where were they in the table?
Where are they? Of course, we don't speak in the past tense.
Yeah, where were you sitting at the table? Where were you sitting?
So the witness there. So, but during this meeting 20 years ago, you're at the head of the table. You're the one giving the orders, bringing the meeting to order, letting him know this is the agenda today. Anyways, so Ryan, on your, with your case, what were your takeaways as far as like telling the story of your case better?
Yeah, I came back, and I think that next week I met with my client to really learn what the story was for real, right? I've obviously spoken to my client before, but after a week with Joe, a week with you learning the performance stuff, I wanted another shake at that. So I sat with my client. I went to his house, sat down for 2 hours, and talked to him and figured out what the case is really about. Because before, even the generic model of what this case is about is something I think everyone could empathize with, or at least sympathize with. It's a double amputee case. My client lost both his legs, but there's something deeper and there's something more that this case is about, and I found it in that meeting, and that's something that's going to drive my strategy and my evaluation of the case, as long as it takes to get that full value.
And TLU Huntington Beach is going to be the greatest event of 2026. There's going to be 4 lecture tracks, 8 workshop tracks with the top trial lawyers in the country. On Tuesday, June 2nd, there's going to be a golf outing, pickleball outing. That night, we're going to have a dinner at the La Rea. We're going to buy it out. Everybody gets a chance to meet each other beforehand. And then during the conference, of course, we do a full breakfast, full lunch, and theme parties every night. This year, we're going to be utilizing the pool area and the restaurant for more of the parties. And we're going to have an adult swim one night, a Satch Oliver party on Friday night. And the last theme party is going to be a 80s Run DMC Adidas jumpsuit. It's going to be the greatest. And last year we had over 800 people. This year it's going to be over 1,000. So if you want to be part of it all and you want to stay at the Paseo Hotel, don't delay, because it sells out fast and then you're going to be in the overflow. Can't wait to see you there. TLU Beach. You talked about coming back and sitting down with your client, because we spend about half a day on witness prep and direct examination. And actually in the boot camp I did last week, we spent more than that, because it's such a challenge for most lawyers. And most people are like, oh, I hate direct. It's so boring. I'm like, that's crazy. I mean, I get where you're coming from, but like, you better learn how to get good at it, because you got to prove your case. It's not just a matter of punching holes in the other guy's case. You have to prove your case, right? And and being able to do, well, you can't be great at direct examination unless you really are good at, or somebody that works with you really good at witness preparation. Because if that witness is not prepared to share their story and bring down their barriers that are preventing them from accessing it, it's going to be a flat narrative of the facts that's not going to move anybody. But, hopefully, because I've been doing this a little bit while now, training and coaching and stuff with lawyers, but so many people that, I know a long time ago say to me, Dan, I appreciate all your shit, but the best shit you ever gave us that I still use more than anything is your witness prep and direct examination stuff. And so, and we gave a little bit of that, because the big challenge for us, and, look at your two cases, catastrophic injuries, right? I mean, the kind of injuries that, many people might kill themselves if they lost both their legs, because they say, why? What am I going to do? Let's see, I can't play pickleball. I can't fly a plane. I may be able to golf, but I'm not very good as it is right now, right? So if I'm standing on two stilts, I can only imagine how challenging golf would be for me. Fitness, there goes the fitness. I just don't have the discipline not to eat and eat that clean and just do upper level cardio. You know what I mean? Whereas so much is taken. And, for anybody not to go into chronic, deep depression after losing something like that would be, I would say, wow, if they're able to transcend this experience without going into the deepest, darkest pit that they've lived, ever could imagine, that's amazing. But most people go into that darkness, and they go deep into that darkness, and their lives are shit, hell, and if you've ever experienced depression before, then you understand what that hell is like. And if you've never experienced depression, you can't even begin to connect with what they're going through. They can talk and they can share, and you can try to imagine, but unless you lived, those months of hopelessness where you didn't even want to get out of bed, where you just didn't talk to anybody, and you watched a lot of TV, a lot of series like Californication, where you just watch, 4 hours a day, or Spartacus, because, you're just doing anything to distract your mind, and until you understand that you don't really understand, right? If you haven't been through it. And so these people that have been through this, well, by the time it's time for their deposition, it's typically a year, 2 years down the road. And the majority of them have moved on. They have repressed that horrificness deep into their unconscious, so it doesn't affect them anymore. And now they're smiling and they're happy and they're a role model for everybody, and they focus on their kids and their family, and they found a way to go back to work. And man, they are superheroes, right? Which is what we want. But then we say, hey, Will, tell me about the crash. We need to talk about it. I need to understand what really happened. I need you to take me there. Well, the reaction you're going to get from the majority of people is fuck off, right? The majority. They're going to be like, no, I'm not doing that. You're the lawyer. You know the story. You have all the police reports. You have the video. You have all the statements. Tell me why I have to suffer. Tell me why I have to go into this darkness, because, I don't want to go there, because I'm afraid if I go there, I won't come back out. I will be stuck in that hell called depression, and I'm not going to do it. So you just go do your job as best you can, but don't bring me into it. I did my part. I got hurt. Okay. I'm here suffering. I'm here surviving. Okay. But don't torture me anymore. And their points are very valid. It's hard to, rebut that, everything they've said. But the truth is, as trial lawyers, we have to get them to go there, right? Because we can't expect the jury to give the money, to give the value for pain and loss that they don't understand, that they don't experience. And so that's the great challenge of witness preparation. We have to go and gently rip those bandages off and, get them comfortable going into that dark space so they can relive the event, so we can really understand what happened to them, and letting them know that they can come, that they won't be stuck there, that we're going to be their guides. We're going to go into that darkness with them. We're going to explore everything there so we can really understand, because until you do that, it's hard to really be an advocate for the cause, right? Because you don't really understand what that person went through. But once you do this witness preparation and you're able to get them to transport back in time and space to relive the event of the tragedy and to relive the events of their journey back to wherever state they're in now, to maximum medical recovery, maximum emotional recovery, and the struggles that they had to go through, we can't understand. And if we can't understand, we can't explain it to the jury. And so, that's, the key to the witness preparation. And, in my humble opinion, it's like giving you the ability to be like Scotty in Star Trek. You push a button and you teach that witness how to transport from this boardroom or this conference room or your office back in time and space. And so that they relive the events as they relive the events so that we can relive them too, right? But then the challenge is, after we've done that, is to take and transition that into the question and answer format. And which is, it seems pretty straightforward and easy, doesn't it? That it's like, it shouldn't be too challenging for us, but it is. So Ryan, you just talked about some of the stuff that you learned on witness prep. So, kind of share a little bit with what you learned on that and like how you applied it, when you got back with your client.
Well, yeah, that's what that client meeting more or less was. I mean, we don't have any depositions coming up. We just recently, filed and got service. But, what I learned in those witness prep sessions with you, conveying that to the client, and you're like, hey, take me to the moment. We're talking in the present tense, right? This is not something that happened 8 months ago anymore. I want you to take me back to that moment. All right. And there are a lot of moments that are super relevant to this case. Obviously, the crash, the event, that's a big part of it. But I want you to take me back to the moment. I got this straight from Joe Freed. Take me to the moment. It's 2 a.m. and your wife's asleep and you can't fall asleep. What's going through your head? What are you thinking about? What's keeping you up at night now that, this is where you're at? And it's those moments that are real, that I think anyone can empathize with. And it goes back to what Joe taught, goes back to what you taught, is you need to be your client's guide or, your witness's guide on direct. It's not supposed to be boring. Hey, if you have that attitude, guess what? It will be boring and nobody on the jury is going to care. But if you can give your client the courage, right, saying, hey, I'm going to go there with you, right? I'm going to guide you there and we're going to go there together. You're not going to go back into this dark pit alone, but I need to know your story in order to tell your story. And if we can't tell them your story, then this case isn't going to be, what either of us wants it to be.
Right. How about you, Will? Have you tried to apply any of these skills of witness prep and getting the story since you've been back in a few weeks?
Yeah, I have. The case that we were talking about that I brought to the conference, I met with some of the family members because they're the ones that are going to be the best witnesses as to some of the damages specifically. And one question I had is, for one of the family members is, am I going to be able to get him to go to the place I need him to go? Because he's very stoic. He's very, he's already told me he's not going to go there, because that's just not who he is. And so we've had to work on it. And he might not be my option A. I might need to go to option B and strategically, go somewhere else with that to get that same type of testimony. As much as I want it from him, and I know he feels it, and it's his story, but he's not, we're not there yet. But without this conference and without thinking about it, I would not have revisited that, and I would have just taken for granted that one day this guy's going to get up there and tell this story, and if I had done that, it would fall flat. It would suck. And the jury would be like, well, this is really bad, but he doesn't seem to care. So we're not going to care. So why are we here? But, and that was kind of, with all the different performance skills and all the different things we've learned, it's not just trial, all right? It kind of gives you a new way to think about your approach to prepping a case for trial, even early on, right? Whether it's maybe it's the first meeting with the client, you might need to feel them out on a couple issues, whether it's why is this case important to you, or is this a witness that's going to come off well to a jury? Are they going to be able to, describe what they saw and what they experienced in a way that's helpful to their case? I've had probably some new clients I've signed up thinking this way, where I already know this is not a case that's going to go to trial because this witness, they're not a good witness for themselves, and the jury is not going to connect with them because they can't tell their own story. And so, so tactically we make different decisions, and, if there's an opportunity to compromise and maybe settle, it's a compromise, but that might be in their best interest.
Sometimes it is, a lot of times it is in their best interest, especially if they can't tell their own story. And, that's why I think it's important that people start working early and often on these cases with their client, to getting that connection, getting that trust, to getting that, hey, I'm your guide. I am going to go there with you. You will not be alone, and you will not be abandoned. And so, but that takes, because the other aspect of witness preparation is the direct examination. And, as we saw from practicing, once we got the story, trying to do a direct of it was very challenging for almost everybody. And, but like, you don't know how challenged it until you get up and try it. There's a little bit of pressure. You're like, oh my goodness, if this is what I look like in the courtroom, this is not acceptable. I would not want this guy representing me in the courtroom, right? I have got to improve this ability to tell this, to not tell the story, but to be the catalyst for the witness to tell the story, by asking the right kinds of questions. Like, now I want to talk to you about the day of the crash. Okay. And asking it with the right emotional state, be like, now I want to talk to you about the day of the crash where you lost your two legs, where we're going to get like $30 million. Okay. That's probably not going to go over too well, right? If you just think about it. And people so miss the point when they're being the directors, that they are the directors of this story. And I tell witnesses, when we do this, you are the star. I am the director. You cannot be, only one man in history has been the star and the director and won the Academy Award. And that, of course, is Clint Eastwood. And you're not Clint Eastwood, and I'm not Clint Eastwood. So you be the star and let me be the director, okay? They kind of get that, right? And so, but as a director, though, we are the catalyst to the emotional state, right? If our emotion doesn't match the emotion of the story looks fake, right? When the person's up there in basic tears talking about it, and you're like, so when you lost both your legs and you realize you can never walk again, John, how'd that make you feel? It's like the guy's in tears, how the fuck do you think it made me feel, buddy? Why don't you try to lose your legs? Let me tell you how you feel. It's pretty obvious how I feel. Can't tell. And then when you ask that question, when lawyers ask that stupid ass question, how did it make you feel? Which is, I consider to be the worst question on earth, because if a person's feeling it, everybody's feeling it too. And if they're not feeling it, talking about it is not going to get anybody to that feeling, And so it's or what happened next. It takes you to the next moment in time, as opposed to what happened. So tell us what happens from there, which allows the witness to tell a small narrative, right? And so when we train witnesses, I typically train them, unless it's a yes or no question or a one answer question, to basically chunk your answers into 30 to 60 second blocks, because those are little mini stories that you can connect with, right? And and just practicing with them, showing them videos, and we practice with your clients, warm them up. But I think it's crazy to put a client on the stand and not have them testify and be cross-examined in front of a focus group, even if it's a focus group of your colleagues, the paralegals and secretaries at your office, just as though it's in front of somebody, so they understand what the tension is like to be up there in front of people, and B, they can get comfortable with their emotions in front of strangers. Right? It's one thing, how many times have I heard people tell me how great their client was in the office, and they put him on the stand and it was like robot. I'm like, did you practice with them in front of a folks? No, I didn't have time. Or the budget didn't justify it. I'm like, the budget didn't justify it? Like, you're going to trial. You're spending days, if not, weeks, if not months of your life getting ready. And this is a one person's chance. And it's also, an opportunity for yourself to define who are you. People are like, oh, I got this big trial coming, but I got the small one coming. I really want to work on the big one. I'm like, you should work on that small one just as hard, because if you crash and burn on that small one, you're probably not going to go to trial on the big one, because your mental state is going to be shot. Your confidence is going to be shot, right? Whereas if you put everything into that small case and you go and hit that thing for $100,000 when they offered you $5,000, well, now how do you think that affects our confidence, huh? Quite the right way, right? So it's all these things that, and there's no, all these things that people have to do. And just like, we also worked a little bit, maybe about a half a day today on voir dire, which is another challenging thing, right? And really worked on what I call it the rapport voir dire, which is, beginning the process, biases defined, and brutal honesty. And, those obviously are, first part of trial, very challenging. Most people, give into the nerves, but, so Lake Tahoe, February 8th through 15th. It'll be our 5th year in a row at the same location. We got it dialed in. We rent out the 7-bedroom house on the lake. We train for 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the evening, and ski all day. It's great fun, great learning. You're going to work on your trial skills and on your case itself. So join us in Tahoe for the 5th annual TLU Ski Bootcamp. Ryan, just moving on to the last aspect of what we really talked about, which is the voir dire. What were your takeaways from the voir dire training?
Yeah, and voir dire, just being a facilitator, right? You want the jury or the prospective jurors to sort of have those conversations, not directly with each other, but you're really just moving from one to another. Oh, Will, thanks for that. Hey, Dan, you heard Will say X. Do you agree? Oh, why? Why not? That's your time to observe, right? That's what you're there for, right? And giving them the space to build those connections. That's what it's all about. And I'm one of those lawyers that, voir dire is probably the more intimidating things that I look at going into a trial. I know my witnesses. I know what I'm going to ask. I know what the case is about. I'm confident in my storytelling. But God, I don't know who's going to be sitting in those 12 seats. And I don't know if I can get them to talk. It reminds me of what we led off this podcast talking about, comparing ourselves to, stand-up comedians in some way. It's like, man, am I bombing right now? Are they internally booing me? Am I asking the right questions? It's an intimidating process. And, looking at myself, after your program, as more of a facilitator, as more of a guide, that's helped out a lot.
All right, how about you, Will? What were your takeaways from our voir dire training?
I think for me, it was just harping on the idea of you're building connections early. So we talked about some of the performance skills, the idea of micro connection, and it's another jury selection is just another opportunity to build a connection with every individual juror. It's also the one time you have to try to build a connection between the jurors to pass ideas amongst them so they come to an agreement about what certain things mean or what matters or which rules are important. But it's also about being the most believable, the most credible person in the room. So it's your chance, before an opening or before a closing, to talk directly to them and to let them know who you are and get to know them a little bit too. And it's, if they're gonna trust you, they got to know a little bit about you. And so I guess biggest takeaway is don't take it for granted. It's not just you're not just asking a list of questions. You are you're going to win if you haven't already won your case in deposition or mediation, it's going to happen in jury selection. Everything that happens afterwards, I'm newer at this, but I'm starting to think it matters less and less. I got home and I watched a damages only jury trial and jury selection. And I actually left during voir dire because I knew she lost. She asked a couple questions, and things went a certain way, and I left early, and the result from the jury reflected those questions. Maybe I could be wrong, maybe some other things happened, but I knew, I saw the jurors going like this, and when they're going like that, when people are asking questions, it's not a good spot to be in. And the case had great damages: 3 surgeries, really bad accident. It was a big bad company. Some money and insurance wasn't the problem, but I think they lost the case. Because it was we talked about this with Joe and with you guys too, and all the other participants that were at this conference. But the idea of being an inclusive jury selection versus exclusive, and this example that I watched, with the context of the conference, it was exclusive. She was looking for ways and who to cut, not ways to, despite whether they get their news from Fox or CNN, if that even matters. How do I bring those connections and to show that, like, I don't care where you get your news, but because of where you get your news, is that, are you good for this jury? Let's find a way, right? Like, oh, you're conservative because you watch Fox, so that means you're not going to give my client a lot of money. Is that really true? Do you think just because you're conservative, you don't think that an injury or a life has value? And how do you get that person? Joe gave us this one, asking them, like, well, you've said this is what you think now, but would you be open to changing your mind? Could I convince you otherwise? And when they say, yeah, I could be convinced otherwise, then that's going to be your best juror, because now you've challenged them and you've built that personal connection. So yeah, I'm remembering some of this as we're talking about it. It's kind of neat, but it's that's jury selection, I guess.
All right, because my general philosophy on the stuff that we teach, obviously we don't have a ton of time to do it, but is to people understand the skills that they need: the eye contact, being in control of their emotional state, their hand movement, their voice, and the script, and these scripts that allow them to practice and see other people practice and feel as a juror what they're feeling when somebody else is up there performing that same script, and then also to get the jurors comfortable. That's why the first script at the beginning of the process really doesn't have the jury talking a whole lot. It's more like nodding and, yes, I understand, right? So that's because our communication basically is them. The bridge is built because we're listening. They're listening to us. And when we say good morning, everybody, and we sit there and wait, and we say for them to say good morning back, well, that's us listening to them and us demonstrating to them that we listen. And then, on the second, script that bias is defined, that's when they're actually speaking and, giving up, well, how would you define bias? Oh, like a leaning. Thanks, Will. So we practice, we say thanks to have some warmth on our face like we do as normal human beings. We say thank you. Then say, Ryan, we just heard Will say it's kind of like have a leaning. Would you tend to agree with Will? And I look back and forth, causing the jurors to look at each other while they're talking, right? And so I'm building those connections in between people. I'm proving to them that I'm listening, and I'm proving to them that, validating whatever they say. So I'm getting them comfortable in knowing that you can talk here, and you know what? There is, really, people say, oh, there are no bad answers, but I think it's, you demonstrate there are no bad answers by your acceptance of whatever answer, and then discussing it with other people. What do you think about this, right? And so just developing those skills. And then, the third one is the brutal honesty one, which I think is a great voir dire. I don't think some people deliver it very well. I think it can be, like most things. I think, like everything that we do, there's a best practices, okay? There's a best practices to learn how to witness, prep, and direct. There's a best practices for cross-examination. There's a best practices for performance and using visuals. And there is a best practices for learning the skills of voir dire. And so that you can actually, but if you don't ever learn the skills, how are you ever going to practice? People are like, oh, I do these focus groups to get ready for trial. I'm like, who are you doing them with? Oh, I do them by myself or with my partner. And I'm like, okay, are you videotaping them? No. I'm like, well, are you looking at your performance at all? No, just, the content and the substance, because nobody wants to look at their performance, because that's something that takes a lot of work to change our performance. Like, oh, this is just who I am. I don't want to mess with who I am. I was like, okay, don't mess with who you are. So anyway, so it's kind of like the overview of voir dire. The last thing I want to talk to you guys about is the social aspects of boot camp, because people don't know it, because when they sign up, even though it is a lot of work, we start at, breakfast starts at 7 a.m., goes to 8 a.m., and then, class till 12:30, break till 2, class to 6:30, and then, go out to dinner most nights if you wanted to. So, talk about that just for a minute, because people might think it's all work. There's a lot of it, but there's a lot of, I think it's a lot. I mean, me, of course, I'm having the time of my life there, right? I mean, I got all these people around me that are like focused and are, I'm hopefully transforming their lives. Hopefully, if I'm doing my job right. But what do you think about the social aspects of this world? Because you're not the most social guy. I want to tell you that, buddy. You're not like, it's not easy to get you to hang out.
I would say, I mean, it's
talking about. I'm super friendly.
Yeah, every meal you're eating with like this group of people that you got to know and you're getting to know throughout the week, and but it's the meals are great because it's almost like you've still got more work to do in the afternoon and the next morning, but you've accomplished something, right? Like it's not every day that you can say you accomplished something. You did some work, but and I think through the program, whether it's talking about an idea or getting confirmation from Joe or like mastering one of the segments of one of the scripts, you almost have this like feeling of like I accomplished something today. And so it's like every meal is like a celebration. You do eat a lot and good food. I don't think I've ever eaten better in my entire life. And I don't know, it's been a month. I still regret it. But I don't, because it was awesome. And even Ryan and I, like, we show up kind of knowing each other, but we leave, I think, as closer friends. And I know if I need him, right? If I need to say like, "Hey, I need this," then it's coming, right? And I imagine I could do that with anybody, from the conference. To be honest, so.
No,
the social aspect was amazing. Like Will said, just to echo that, breaking bread with these folks, at least twice a day. You're talking about what you learn in training. You're talking about our own individual cases. You're talking about our practices, our families. You get close to these people, spending so much time together over the course of the week. And then hey, I liked that the lunch breaks weren't rushed. I think we had 2 hours, so it's like, hey, grab something to eat. And there were a couple of days I sought out Joe. I'm like, hey, I got this other case that isn't the subject of my time here, but what do you think of this issue? And it's almost like being in a think tank of plaintiffs lawyers. I get to go around to these new friends and even other participants in the program. Like we were in a group of attorneys been practicing between. Well, no, we kind of ran the gambit. I mean, Daryl's got like 20, 30 years in. I think Alejandro's 10-ish. And Will and I are, still green behind the ears, and that's fine. And we're able to workshop this stuff amongst ourselves. And, that was huge. And of course, grabbing a beer after work with some folks, making those connections. I've gotten a few referrals from some people, oh, hey, I know a guy in North Carolina now. It's amazing. It's a really amazing aspect of the program.
Well, I'm glad you guys appreciate it because, you haven't been to TLU before, but hopefully they'll be out there June 3rd through 6th next year back at the Paseo because I love that hotel. I mean, like that hotel is the best. And it's like they're so kind to all of us, you know what I mean? They make it feel like it's like your home in a weird sort of way. And, I mean, it was a smaller group, but I think it was the biggest group we ever had because we had like 14 participants. At some point we had, 8 to 10 jurors just sitting in, watching, checking things out. And then a few, sponsors, people that I know pretty well, like from, Fox AE. There was Cody, who was like having the best time of his life, and Richard from HMR, and, Beta from Finch were such a, and Tim from Blue Summit, just great group of people that and like Cody's like, this is the best thing ever, man. It's like, I'm not just getting nobody, I'm becoming friends with people. I'm like, no shit. He's like, yeah, it's like, I got all these new friends now. I'm like, me too, because the older we get, the harder it is to make friends. It's just the reality of it because of the time. And, we can be more kind of concretized in who we are. And, we just put up with less crap from people, right? Less tolerant for annoying people or people that don't, I recognize that I am not everybody's cup of tea, but you know what? You recognize faster who's not your cup of tea and don't spend major time with minor people or people you got nothing in common with. So, it's really great to be able to spend that time and not just, and hopefully learn enough and learn skills that will begin to, the transformation of our professional lives, but also to make a, larger group of friends so that when you go to that, like when I go to the ATA conference, so that when you go to the next one and, because Joe like, hey, y'all got to join ATA. Well, so I joined ATA too, because I'm like, you know what? It really, I never really joined much. And, but now that I'm getting much more into, the practice and not practice, but trying cases, I want to be around people who are interested in trying cases and working on their skills and these smaller things that are, and doing it differently than I'm doing it. Right. Obviously what I think I'm doing, I think it's the best. I think everything I do is the best, right? I think I have the best podcasts. I think I have the best webinars. I have the best boot camps, the best conferences. And, and it's like, I better think that, right? Because if I think somebody else is better, I better go learn from them and bring whatever the hell they're doing back to my place. If I'm going to, keep making things the best as I wish they are for all. So, gentlemen, it's been a great conversation. It's the first time I've ever done this, a post-mortem on a boot camp. So, it's always good to chat with people and see what they're doing and how they're putting the skills together. And the day I'm looking forward to the most, though, the day that I dream about these boot camps is when, and it's happened, when the students gets a great result, a 7 or 8 figure result, and then, do a podcast with them. So they come on and get to talk about what they did and how they did it and, a webinar and, and even having them speak at TLU Beach, because I think most people that I know that are trial lawyers want to be on stage, right? I mean, you want to be the guy up there that's like, let me tell you how I did it, folks. Let me tell you what I learned and what I'm continuing to learn so that you can do it too, is what, but I think that's always the goal. I mean, I always wanted to be on, when I go to a conference, I always want to be on the stage. I don't get to be on the stage if it's not my conference, but I think that's where people that, gravitate to what we do, whether they admit it or not, that's what most people would prefer if they're at a conference, right? At least for an hour or two. Anyways. All right. Well, you guys, have as great as Tuesday of your life. Hope you have big, exciting things. I have to jump on a webinar right now with a guy who did a great job in New York City. He tried this case that was 20 years old, a 20-year-old case. I'm like, how does a case go on for 20 years? The jury's listening to a story that happened back in 2004. I'm like, wow. I've heard a lot, people complain about the courts in LA for being slow. At least we got a 5-year limit. After 5 years, you're going to trial. There, 20 years later, here we are waiting to go to trial. But anyways, you guys have an awesome day. And I look forward to hearing about your successes and hopefully seeing you not in Cabo, but maybe sometime before June 2026. So take care, gentlemen.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
See you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Ready to train with the Titans and set records with your verdicts? Register for our live conferences and boot camps at triallawyersuniversity.com. Start getting your reps in before the big event by going to tluondemand.com to gain instant access to live lectures, case analysis, and skills training videos from the trial lawyer champions you love and respect, as well as pleadings, transcripts, PowerPoints, and notes for a roadmap to victory. Join the group that continues to get extraordinary results. Trial Lawyers University, produced and powered by LawPods.